Hey, Coxie. Hey, listeners.
Hello, Warwick. Hello, listeners. How are we all? This is
Oh, we're pretty
quite a
good.
silly question. Nobody can answer me, really, can they?
How are we all? Well, I can answer. I'm great.
Thank you. I'm pleased that you are well. I once told a really bad chemistry joke.
Oh, no.
I feel like this one, I didn't get much of a reaction.
Oh, no.
Oh,
Have you told that one before on the show? Oh, no. That's ringing a bell.
Don't know. I was going to tell one about cows and bells, maybe.
Oh,
Anyway,
I'm sure there's millions of terrible jokes that we could share. It just becomes a bit of a habit, really, doesn't it, Nick?
it's a dreadful habit of mine to do no research and quickly run into it 2 seconds while you're informing our guests what's going to happen next.
And then I do a rotten segue, which is almost actually my segues are way worse than your jokes. I'm just going to put that out there.
Oh, no, sometimes you nail them. I think we're both pretty poor.
We're not really on point today, which is disappointing because our guest is going to talk about a fantastic topic. I'm stoked for this conversation, this Q&A. Dr. Gina Cleo, welcome to the podcast.
thanks for having me, guys. And I thought your segue was excellent, actually, from where I'm sitting.
Thanks,
I really
Gina.
appreciated it.
I'm feeling very validated right now, so thank you. Gina, you're joining us all the way from the freezing cold Gold Coast in the middle of an Australian winter. It must
is
be
cold.
terrible.
I'm in Mudgeeraba. I'm on acreage, and I swear my house is in like a ditch. So it is cold. It was 3 degrees when I left to go to Pilates this morning, and that's pretty cold. That's
That's
pretty
pretty
cold.
cool.
That's
Yeah.
pretty fresh.
Yep. I bet it'll be 23 degrees in about 7 minutes' time, though.
It is. It's about 20, actually. Let's not exaggerate.
We do have westerlies again, though, Gina. They are blowing in. So it is
Yes.
a cooler day. Stop it, Warwick. Let
It's
us know
all
how you're
relative.
feeling. We can.
It's all relative. I'll be complaining about how hot it is here in Tasmania in about 6 months' time, and you can all laugh at me as well. Gina, we're not here to talk about the weather, though, although, look, there's another segue for me. It's something that people just do out of habit, Hi, how you going? Oh, pretty good. How's things? Yeah, all right. Weather's nice. Like, just there's such a lot we could talk about on this topic, but before we get into habits and our brains and stuff that you're going to be way smarter about than me, can you tell listeners a bit about, well, you've got a doctor in front of your name, so that's pretty impressive. And yeah, tell us a bit about how you came to be sitting here talking to us today.
Well, I actually started my career as a dietitian. I was always really fascinated with like health and wellness and really wanting to help people. And I was a dietitian for about 7 years, but I just found that people only got results short term, that they would come back to my clinic wanting to work on the very same things we'd already worked on. And I myself was also struggling with my own, I guess, habits. I would finish a day in my clinic and on my way home, I'd be, finishing off a packet of Tim Tams before dinner and feeling really out of control. And so I became really fascinated with that idea of long-term change or sustainable outcomes. And I just started doing some sort of casual research it started with. And then one of, I guess, a colleague or an acquaintance said to me, when are you going to do your PhD? I've always thought you'd be a brilliant researcher. Now, this person also happened to be the head of research at Bond University.
Wow.
And yeah, a couple of weeks later, I had a desk. I was starting my PhD. And I now do just full-time habit change work in all spheres, not just in dietetics. And I'll never look back. It's been the best thing ever.
Gina, did you have to change your personal habits, or was that one of the first places you needed to start to be able to do the research involved in a
Yeah.
PhD?
It was just such a journey of self-discovery, I think. And I really believe that if I can change my habits, then I can help other people. And unless I can do that for me, I don't even want to attempt to try to help other people because I don't really understand the true battle or what it's really like. So, oh yeah, it was definitely refining by fire.
Yeah. It's interesting because Nicole and I have just been working this morning. That was very formal, Nicole, wasn't it?
It is. I don't
Nicole
like
and
it
I.
when you come. I feel like I'm in trouble.
Coxie and me have been working on some of our own business marketing and communication stuff this morning before we recorded this podcast with you, Gina. And something that springs to mind is question that Nick and I are trying to answer is basically, why would you trust us in terms of, business work with a tradie business? And I just spontaneously listed out all of the stuff ups that Nick and I have made in the last 25 odd years collectively. And I mean, it's a pretty depressing list in some ways. There's 3 divorces and 17 marriage counselors and hundreds of thousands of dollars lost. Like we've been through all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's because we've lived that experience, and lived experience is something that gets chucked around a lot these days in different spheres.
Yeah.
But we've actually lived that experience and learned from it, applied our learnings to turn our own lives and businesses and everything around. And so it's from that base that we can actually go and help other people. So I love your approach of, well, if I can't fix my habits, how am I going to help anybody else?
Yeah,
So I think that's a
totally.
fantastic
I
way to
love
do
that
it.
you guys can also just lay that out and just be like, this is us. Hey, and add another divorce on, for like, if I'm in this conversation now.
That's what it's for. And none of
We're
us
all
are married to each other. So that's really impressive.
I love it.
Well, it is
Keeping it real
2024.
here.
Yeah.
But I think, a lot of people will see, say, a successful business person and they assume that you have it all together. They assume that you've just gone from strength to strength and you've always known what you're doing, but it's never like that. I actually think the most successful people are the ones that have learnt all the difficult lessons. I almost call them artists. It's like we're artists in our craft, because we've had to grind our way through it. And it's not just what we do, it becomes how we breathe. It's how we live. It's like the fabric of our being becomes this thing that we do because we get so into it, because we've had to learn so much to get to where we are. Like we don't just take it for granted. So it's cool.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating thought. I observe a lot of influencers, and I'm watching how influencers that have true influence are really shifting, or the ones that are being accepted as shifting. And there seems to be more of a focus on the moment of the real story instead of the highlight reel that we were all so used to for a period of time.
Yeah.
I see now those who share not just here's the grit and the dirt and why it's so hard, here's then what I did to try and make a change and what worked for me. I see that being far more successful now, just without, I don't know that in its true form, it's particularly staged. I think they're true journeys and true stories, and very much reflecting what you're talking about here, Gina, is people are sharing the truth of what they're going through instead of the glitz, which isn't real. Nobody ever gets to the top of what they're doing without having the difficult challenges to work their way there. Are you seeing something similar?
I am. I mean, I'm not a huge social media person. Like, I don't sort of sit and scroll for a long time, but I'm definitely noticing a bigger trend towards this idea of vulnerability and just being very real about things. And I know even for me, like when I'm sharing, the posts that get the most interactions are usually the ones where I'm like, guys, I had planned to go to the gym today, and now I've been scrolling on Facebook Marketplace for the last 2 hours and I'm still not out of bed. And it's like, they're the ones that people are like, oh my gosh, you're human. I did this too. Hey, how do we stop doing that?
Yes.
And it's really cool just to be able to be a lot more real, I think, online.
All right, Gina. So Nick and I have done lots of reading as part of us navigating our multiple divorces and many hundreds of thousands of dollars lost and all that stuff that we've talked about. And we both read a fair bit around habits. And as coaches, we taught lots of stuff around success habits and that sort of stuff. We're both actually pretty interested or passionate about the health space as well, or well-being, to make it a little more all-encompassing. And I have made a lot of changes in my own life, and things are habits for me now that I don't even think about that took a lot of hard work when I first changed them. Coxie and I also obviously coach people in business, and we see people who are kind of stuck, and it's like no matter how many tools we give them, no matter how much we encourage them or shame them or whatever, they just seem stuck in their ways. Is that what we're talking about when it comes to habits? Can you sort of unpack this concept a little bit for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, we are really comfortable in doing the things that we've always done. I love this quote. It says, most of the time, what we do is what we do most of the time, and only sometimes do we do something different. our brain is really comfortable in our routines. And there's lots of reasons for that. But one of the biggest reasons, and this resonates especially for business owners, is that we make on average 35,000 decisions every single day. Our brain is so prone to information overload. Especially as an entrepreneur, we can tend to take it all on. We're the marketers, the bookkeepers, the accountants, the everything. And so when you're talking to someone about making a change, our brain's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Change means extra work, extra decision making. And if I just keep doing what I've always been doing, I don't have to exert any more energy, and I can preserve my energy. But something new takes effort. And so we're naturally resistant to change. It really has to get to the point where we see that the pain of staying the same outweighs the pain of change. We have to get to that intrinsic part of our motivation, where it's like, yeah, you know what? This change is not going to be easy, but it's going to be so much better for me in the long run. You really have to get to that pain point, that, really hitting on someone's values.
We see a lot of people stuck at that point, Gina, where they're just, they can see the pain, they understand the motivation to change, and they still don't change.
Yeah.
I wonder whether there is a way to support or help. Clearly, there's a lot of what you do that supports and helps people make change.
Yeah.
I find that a really fascinating topic. As a parent, I try to influence, support, and navigate change with my family, but it doesn't necessarily happen. Are there some particular keys or steps that can help somebody through that period of change?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things I often see people getting wrong is that they're creating goals that are either too big, they're trying to make too many changes, or they're just not supported, whether it's environmentally or with the right resources. Our brain's only capable of making up to 3 changes at one time. But often when we're trying to make a change, we want to overhaul things. We want to eat better and exercise more and meditate and have a gratitude journal. And, we want to do so many things. And it's awesome to be ambitious. But at the same time, it's kind of like going up against Serena Williams in a tennis match. Our brain's like, well, I'm not going to win this anyway, so I may as well just give up.
Yeah.
And at the same time, when our goals are too small, we tend to lose motivation as well. It's actually, our brain goes into a state called hypoarousal. It's like under arousal. It's not going to exert the energy required for you to do the job. And, going back to a tennis analogy, it would be like you on the court with a 5-year-old child who's never played tennis before. It's like, you're not going to give it your all unless you're savage, because you know that you can easily win this match.
Yeah.
And so what you want to start with is something so small you feel like you can't say no to doing it, but it's enough to still stretch you. And it often means that you have a bigger goal, but then you dissect that goal into smaller bits, and those smaller bits become your micro habits, the little things you want to achieve. And once you've achieved that, then you might want to increase the frequency or the intensity of that habit. But don't ever try to aim for that, the big goal straight away. It doesn't work like that.
That seems to be a very male approach. Sorry, Coxie. We talk to tradies, tradie business owners, and lots of guys, and we obviously talk to lots of tradie wives as well. But I find the guys, and from my own experience, if something I think could be improved or needs to be fixed, I'm like, just give me all the tools and I'll throw everything at it.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to my own stuff, whether it's my own business results or my own health, I'll go get, like a massive program in the gym, and I'll aim for 6 workouts a week, and I'm going to add ice bathing and all this other stuff. And like you say, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's just not sustainable. Our society primes us with this idea that if we want to succeed, we need to go hard or go home. To give something all or nothing. And if you're not giving it all, then you're not really motivated. You're not really giving it enough energy. You don't really care enough about it. And I have a passion of debunking this mindset, because it's all well and good if you just want to do something for a week or maybe 2 weeks, but it does not work long term. Sustainability is all about small, consistent changes. and celebrating your victories. And it's really humbling. I think this is why it's quite hard for a lot of people, especially business owners. We're already quite adventurous and creative and risk-taking. And the idea of small changes feels so tedious and feels almost like boring. It's like, no, I know I can do more. But when we think about, no, the goal is sustainability, the goal is long-term, it's humbling to go, okay, maybe I'll just peel it back a little bit.
I think it feels slow for lots of us. Like it's really staged. And because the steps are those micro habits that we're talking about, it feels really stagnant rather than the fast pace we're all very used to moving at. Gina, I want to break this right down, and I'm going to use exercise, if that's okay, as a way to demonstrate what this could look like on a day-to-day. If I say I want to get fit and that's my goal, how do I break it down into small enough steps so that I can actually achieve the outcome of being fit?
Yeah, great analogy. So getting fit, that is the goal. And then you're going to have to think about, well, how do I get to that goal? So it might be, I'm going to do 4 workouts a week. And, you can decide what those 4 workouts look like. Now, if you're someone who has never exercised, your micro habit or that first step for you is going to look different than someone who's already sort of maybe in the rhythm of movement. I worked with someone who hadn't done any movement in over 20 years. He was quite overweight. And it was really overwhelming for him to think about even going for a walk, even going out to his letterbox felt overwhelming. So I said to him, I just want you to start with putting your sneakers on for the first week. That's it. Just get up, put your shoes on, and that's all you need to do. And he just found by doing that having his sneakers on motivated him to walk around the house a bit more and then eventually to his letterbox. And now this guy walks 10 kilometers every single day. Like he considers himself a walker, but it had to start with that really little goal. So your first step might be, out of the 4 workouts I want to do a week, I'm going to do 1. I'm just going to do 1. Or it could be, I'm going to go 4 days a week, but I'm only going to do 15 minutes. So you're like that micro habit is going to look different for every person. But it's just what the answer really is, what's something that I can do even when I'm kind of tired, sort of stressed, don't really feel like going? What's something I know I can still do? And that's your starting point. Now, once you've achieved that and it feels a bit more natural, a bit more organic, a bit more part of your lifestyle, then that's when you can add to it and you can layer it with more workouts or a longer period of time or more intensity or whatever it is that your goal is going to be.
Gina, is that the reason why, standardized exercise programs often don't work, or standardized diets often don't work, because they're not meeting us where we're at?
Yes, exactly. And they're often challenges, right? They're often like, whatever it might be, like 21-day challenge or, whatever it is. And that's okay if 21 days is your goal. But if you're aiming for sustainability, that's not exactly the right avenue to get you there. I don't believe in one size fits all with anything, especially when it comes to health. A few years ago, oh my gosh, I love sharing this story because it's just like, encompasses so much of, I think, the wisdom that I've acquired in the last few years. But I was trying to use a meditation app to decrease my stress levels. And I work from home. So I'm like, okay, I've got this app, like I know what I'm doing. And I just could not for the life of me do it properly. I couldn't do it well. And I'm like, okay, I'll try another app. Like we do with diets. I'll do another diet. That diet didn't work for me. And I just found that trying to use meditation apps was actually making me more stressed than, the outcome of it. Then I remember this day, I walked outside, I was in the sunshine. I live on acreage, so it's a beautiful backyard, and I was playing around with my dog. And I felt so relaxed. And I'm like, this is what I was trying to achieve with these meditation apps. Now, when you get a list of bullet points of how to reduce your stress, playing around with your dog in the backyard might not be one of them, but it is for me. That's what works for me. And so does archery. I love getting out there with my bow and arrow and having this mind-body connection. That for me is meditative. And the wisdom that I guess I acquired from it is what works for you, stopping all the noise, not looking at what anyone else is doing. What's the outcome you're trying to achieve? and how does it work for you to get there? And that's all you need to do.
Love that. I'm thinking about our tradiepreneur members and some of the people who are a bit stuck on doing it the way they think it's supposed to be done instead of finding the way that works for them. Gina, I want to talk about bad habits and this concept of breaking bad habits or getting rid of an old habit. I've read a bit of stuff around this. I'm fascinated to hear your perspective based on your research and your experience around if I've got a habit that's not serving me, I'm doing something repeatedly. I'll just take one that may or may not be an issue. I don't think it is because I drink a lot of coffee. Addiction aside, it's actually a habit for me to make the coffee, drink the coffee. And so I drink quite a few. And let's say I think that's not serving me. I want to break that bad habit. Can I just stop that habit or is there some other way I can actually change my behavior?
It's really hard to just say to your brain, just stop doing that. It's kind of like saying, don't press the red button. Don't think of purple elephants. Your brain's like, red button, I must press the red button.
Thinking of a purple elephant.
Exactly. Now, every habit that we have gives us some kind of reward, even if the habit isn't serving us in other ways. So the coffees that you're having give you a hit of dopamine. And you love the ritual of it. There's a comfort in the ritual of making the coffee, the smell of the coffee, all of that around it feels good for your brain. It probably also means that you get a little break. It's a little bit of self-indulgence for you. So even though it may not be serving you in other ways, you are getting rewarded from it. So if you were to just go, I'm not going to do that anymore, your brain's like, hey, I'm missing out on all these rewards that I used to get. Why would I stop doing this? This makes absolutely no sense. What you might do is pick up another bad habit in replace of the coffee to feel that sense of dopamine in that reward again. So there are two proven ways that we can break our unwanted habits. One way is to replace your unwanted habit with a good habit, and the other way is to avoid the triggers. So the first way is the replacing. You want to sort of create an environment where you might not be having coffee, but you can have an alternative. There's something else that you have, whether it's a decaf or a tea or whatever it is. I know these words might be heresy for a coffee drinker.
It's just an analogy, okay? I don't have a coffee addiction.
Okay,
it's
good.
fine.
It might be half a shot. Like there's all these sort of alternatives that you can do. You can also cut it down. You can say, instead of having however many coffees, I'm going to cut it down to this many coffees. And that's still okay. The other way is to change your environment so that you're not triggered. Now, every habit we have is triggered by something. For example, getting in your car and putting on your seatbelt. Putting on your seatbelt's a habit for most of us. It's getting in the car, though, that triggers us to do that. Most people wake up and the first thing they do is look at their phone. Waking up is the trigger to check their phone. So if we look at all of our habits, good and otherwise, they're going to be triggered by something. It's going to be the same time, the same place, because of the same feeling, because of the people that we're around, or what we've just done beforehand. So if you can identify the trigger for your unwanted habits, that's where you want to start. So where are you when you're doing the coffee? It might be because of the time of day, for example. It's like certain times of day I make a coffee. So you can't avoid the times of day because they're going to occur whether you like it or not.
Yep.
But it could be around those times that you've already planned to do something else. Like you're in a meeting or the environment has changed so that it's not easy for you to just do that habit. Get rid of the coffee machine if you need to. Like, don't depend on your self-control is really the aim of the game when we're changing our habits.
That's a great point. And again, I'm thinking about the application of this for our listeners as business owners. They habitually say yes to things with clients. They'll have a client ask them to, can you come out this afternoon to do a quote? And despite the fact that they know that they're supposed to be spending this evening with the family, and if they go and do this quote, it means that the invoicing will have to happen at 9 p.m. They still say yes out of habit, even though cognitively, and like consciously, they know that it's not serving them. They just keep saying yes. Is that kind of the same thing as me having 7 coffees a day?
I mean, it can be for sure. If it's something they're doing automatically and they're like, oh, I didn't even realize I said yes to that, that subconscious act is generally going to be a habit. And I love that you bring this up, Laz, because we often think our habits are just our behaviors. It's the things we do. But our habits are also the way that we think. It's our belief system. It's the way we react or respond to something. So the way that, the automatic yes on the phone can certainly be habitual. And one of the ways you can think of, breaking that is to have a pause. There's a space between the trigger and the behavior that we take. And in that space is where our freedom lies. And what I mean by that is when our habits are triggered, it feels like they're automatic. It's like AB, it just like happens so quickly. But if we can just take a moment just to take a breath, literally just a breath in and a breath out, we allow ourselves a bit more space to just inject a bit of mindfulness, get that prefrontal cortex, the logical brain working, because our habits come from our amygdala, our emotional brain. So if we can just engage logic, it can really make a huge difference to what we do next.
I'm thinking about specifically bad habits and what you've just explained, Gina, and it feels as though we're kind of in this space in society and time where bad habits are almost encouraged by the way, think about social media, for example, and the dopamine hit and how that is now filtering through our lives. And so I wonder whether this becomes really hard for us to change in terms of bad habits. And what I see as a bad habit for me might not necessarily be a bad habit for somebody else. I want to make that clear for our listeners. This is about what you determine to be good and bad for yourself, or what's serving you and what's not, maybe is a better way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking, okay, about my kids. My kids are young adults. All of our clients' kids are very, very young. And I can see what potentially could be thought of as habits that aren't serving them slipping into their lives, but they're becoming something that is across the entire generation and potentially can create a bigger problem with society moving forward. Is there something about that you're seeing as a trend, or do you have some comment on some of those thoughts?
Oh, it's such an important point, and it's massive, and I actually think it's kind of terrifying in a way. I love when I do corporate speaking around Australia, I love to ask people, I do a habit confessional when I ask people, what's your most unwanted habit? And it's an anonymous poll and all the little like cloud bubbles pop up on the screen. And time again, no matter who I ask, I find that people say these 5 things. And the first one is always, I spend too much time on my phone. And the other ones are I snack when I'm not hungry, procrastinate, I stay up way too late, and I snooze my alarm in the morning. Now, what's really interesting about the data here is that scrolling on our phone used to be a real issue for millennials. That age group was it. But over the last, I'd say 5-ish plus years, I've now seen that trend across every age group. No matter who I speak to, at whatever level of business, scrolling on their phone on social media seems to be the biggest unwanted habit. And it's so easy. Our phones have this pervasive nature to them where they're always an arm's length away. It's so easy just to grab it, get that quick dopamine hit. And it used to be okay to have like a 5-minute scroll, but dopamine doesn't work like that. Dopamine always wants more and more and more. And so what used to be 5 minutes could be hours now. Actually, the data shows we're spending on average 2.5 hours a day scrolling just on social media. So I am a big advocate of intentional social media use. I have phone-free zones in my house. I have phone-free times during my day where I won't let my phone govern what I'm doing. Like I'm always want to be in control of my scrolling, which is why I said before, I'm not a scroller. I actually get to a point where I'm like, I want to be anti-establishment with this. I don't want to be sucked into this.
I'm hopeful, despite most people listening to this on their phones,
Oh.
But that's their conscious phone use time, Nick.
Yeah, it's intentional. That part's okay.
This podcast is okay because it's in your intentional use period.
Agreed.
I watched a movie many years ago, and whether you love or hate Adam Sandler or something in between, there's a movie years ago called Click. And it was about, he had this magical remote control where he could, mute the wife or the kids, or he could rewind and fast forward through boring parts of his life. But what ended up happening, and it was interesting, this movie was made like pre-social media, that this remote control started to actually take over his life, and he was skipping years of his life. And I still remember the scenes in the movie where he realized what was happening, and he tried to get rid of this remote control, and he would throw it in the bin, and he'd turn around and there it was back in his hand. He'd chuck it out the window and he's like, yes, I got rid of this stupid thing. And then he'd go to do something. It's like, it's back in his hand, and you could replace that remote control with our phones. And so it's kind of ironic to see some of these, movies and things and books that have been written over the years that were almost like predicting what was going to happen.
Yeah.
I guess, my point with that is it does become so mindless, and so many of our habits are just unconscious. They're embedded within us. And we've talked a bit about how to change that. We hear tradies and trade business owners say a lot about time. You talked about 2.5 hours a day of scrolling. They say, I just need to block time for that. And I think that would, and I don't know if you agree with this, Coxie, but within our tradiepreneur community, our client community, I think that would be the number one struggle for our clients, is changing their habits around their time use and their time awareness. Is that something that you've seen, Gina? And have you got, again, any insights on that?
I think a lot of people say, I have a lack of time. Yeah. And they sort of use that as whether it's a justified excuse or not, for not doing the thing that they are saying that they want to do, because it's so easy to say, I don't have time. But again, I feel like if you were to not scroll on social media for 2.5 hours a day, we would have a lot of time. I'm personally a big believer that if you really want something, you will do it. Like, you'll make the time to do it. And look, putting aside things like addictions, and I'm not being punitive and being like, if you really want to quit, you can. I don't mean that at all. There are some serious and really difficult challenges out there. But I mean things like, if you want to exercise, if you want to make another phone call to a client, if you want to do those things, you absolutely can. It just requires the discomfort of doing something different in your day. But once you get the reward of that, it's like exercise. You get a dopamine hit from exercise. Once you do it, it can become an addiction, and it feels awesome. And you feel gross if you don't do it, and you can get to that. But it also needs to start becoming your identity. It's not, I want to do this. It's, I do this. I'm the kind of person who does this. So again, starting small and making the time for it.
Jeannie, there seems to be a bit of consistency with you and many others talking about being uncomfortable and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Are there some strategies we can use to begin to be more okay with being uncomfortable or facing something uncertain, so that we can start to make some of these changes that we desperately want to?
Yeah, I mean, I went through some like trauma therapy a few years ago after this horrible event that happened in my life. And part of it was really learning about my body and my breath and sitting with these trauma triggers that I was getting. And my psychologist at the time would get me to this point of hyperventilation where I'm like totally terrified at this thought. And she would then ask me, what's happening in your body? And I would change my thought into my breath and physically what was happening. And what that was teaching my mind is, oh, I'm actually safe. I'm okay. This is all good. And through that exposure therapy, I learned that everything's going to be fine. Like, we're fine. All these trauma triggers are fine. And now I can sit with discomfort a lot more. But at the time, it felt like it was, taking over my world. So I think working through some really discomfort things with a psychologist is probably the best, or some sort of professional help. But in our everyday life, It's literally just sitting and being like, I feel anxious. I feel bored. I feel whatever, lonely, whatever it is, and sit with it. Don't try to change it. Don't judge it. Don't try to like distract yourself. It's like, what does that feel like for me? And like almost like embrace it, because the only way out of an emotion that's uncomfortable is through it. We can't get away from it any other way. And I think that's actually been one of the worst things about our phones is how easy it is to distract ourselves from discomfort and not really have to deal with those icky moments. And so we've now got all this undealt with stuff inside us, which makes us want to scroll on our phones even more. So yeah, sitting with it is literally that. It's just sitting and just asking yourself, what does this feel like in my body?
There doesn't seem to be a lot of space. We don't create a lot of space consciously in our lives anymore for those opportunities. We're too busy filling our time with stuff that really doesn't serve us. And then we get into this habit of wanting to break bad habits. And it's just this big circle that we're stuck on a roundabout almost.
Yeah.
We're finding it very challenging to get off that roundabout. At least that's my experience, and it's certainly what I can see and observe in others. And yet the concept of something as simple as space is not something that we're regularly told or we're taught about. And then how do you create that space for yourself? Like, it's a simplistic concept. And I live like you on acreage, as does Warwick. There's a lot of space and time here just meandering or doing something like your archery or something very purposely mindful that isn't distracting. And so what I see in the everyday is that's a very hard concept for us all to create in our time. We talk about brain breaks and we talk about space breaks quite frequently with our community, and yet I see they really struggle with being able to take that time and space. Is there, again, it probably comes back to the habit, I suppose. Is there a way in which we can create that for ourselves without it being the hard thing that it feels like?
That's a really hard question. And I'm not sure. I think it's going to be different for every person. Creating space like that isn't necessarily going to be beneficial for everyone to sort of schedule it in the diary, because sometimes you need to just sit with that feeling when it's present, when it's there, when you're feeling like, you know, you're trying to get away from the feeling. The best thing to do with this would probably be identify some of your unwanted habits that are linked to an uncomfortable feeling. It's generally going to be, say, phone scrolling, for example. You might notice that you phone scroll when you're bored or when you're frustrated. And it's in those moments where you're just about to pick up your phone that you can just stop, just take a moment, just put your phone down, out of sight, and just sit with yourself for 2 minutes. You can put a timer on if you want to, just 2 minutes where you can just sit with yourself distraction free. And I think, you know, catching those things in situ in the moment is the most powerful thing that you can do, because that's when we teach our brain, I'm okay. This feeling is not great, but it passes. It's like a little leaf in a river. Like it just kind of moves away and it's all good.
Good advice.
I've got a 10-month-old son and have, at my stage of life, jumped into reading lots and learning lots more about parenting and some of the not necessarily new, but I guess different approaches to parenting and more mindful and intentional and conscious parenting. Because obviously I want the best for my boy, and you know, I want to be the best dad for him and equip him for the world and what the world might become by the time he's, you know, 20 or 30. And so I've been doing lots of reading around exactly this, the whole discomfort thing, and that there's been sort of a couple of generations, and mine is one of them as parents. You know, I'm starting a bit later in life. And my generation of parents have done lots of work to remove discomfort for their kids, well-meaning, you know, wanting the best for their children. But what it's actually done, based on some of the authors that I'm reading, is rob kids and the younger generations of the ability to face discomfort or uncertainty or anxiety. It's exactly like you're saying, sit with your own sometimes scary thoughts for 2 minutes. You're not going to die, but that feels impossible to some of the younger people coming through. And so
it's true.
Letting them fall over and hurt themselves when they're 10 months old is part of that journey of building resilience. And I think, we're obviously talking about habits, but I think resilience is for me a lot around habit forming and doing those little things habitually that actually contribute to our own resilience rather than habitually turning away from those opportunities. And Coxie and I work with grown-ups who can't cope with what I consider, and I don't mean this from a judgmental space, but what I would consider to be small doses of uncertainty or anxiety. They owe some money to the tax department, and it's literally like the end of the world, and they don't know how they're going to cope. I'm like, it's 10 grand or something. Like, plenty of people have dealt with that. Just make a payment plan. You'll be fine. Like, oh, no, it's terrible and I'm embarrassed and it's, oh my gosh, I can't cope and I can't sleep at night. I'm like, holy moly, but that becomes a habitual response to any of those things. So, I want to ask a different question. That was a really long waffle.
Go for it.
I have a question though about forming habits.
Love waffles.
Get plenty of it around here.
The habit forks.
So forming a new habit. Right? We've talked a lot about habits and habits that serve us and don't serve us. There's some old stuff about, it takes 21 days to build a new habit. And I've also obviously done some reading around this as well. Is that true, or is there a different time period or something? Gina, how do I know when I've actually formed a new habit?
It's not true. It doesn't take just 21 or 28 days. Can I tell you where this myth came from? I would love to share this with you.
Yeah.
So in the 1960s or something like that, there was a surgeon who used to do facial reconstruction on his patients. And he found that after 3 to 4 weeks, when his patients would look in the mirror, they'd stop getting a shock because their face looked different. So he concluded, well, after 21 or 28 days, that's when people experience neuroplasticity. That means that's how long it takes to change a habit. It is not true. It doesn't work like that. There is a really big range, and it's anywhere from about 2 weeks to up to a year.
Wow.
So the latest research in this had a group of people washing their hands every day, and they had another group of people where they asked them to go to the gym, I think 4 days a week. And the hand washers got into the habit of it, became really automatic after 2 weeks. The gym goers took 7 months to get to a point where that became a habit and it was automatic. The difference is hand washing is easy. It's a simple activity. You can do it anytime. There's always a sink around and available. Something like gym going requires time, motivation, energy. There's a lot more complexity in that behavior. The other things that are going to impact how long it takes you to change a habit is how habitual you are as a person. Our temperament's going to play a role in this. And the other one is how badly you want it. The stronger your intention, the quicker your habit will develop. And the weaker your intention, the longer it's going to take you.
Okay,
I don't know whether this is good news or bad news.
Wait. How long it takes. If you just focus on one thing and you do that passionately, like you do it as often as you can, it could probably take you just a few weeks. And I know a few weeks is so arbitrary. The average number in research is about 66 days, which is like 10 weeks. But it could be quicker, depending, again, on those different variables. But just do one thing. I wouldn't try to change more than one thing at a time.
Yeah, I guess that's the advantage of making them really small changes.
Yeah, that's
Mastering
it.
the small change and then moving on to the next small change.
Yes, love it. And you're going to know it's a habit when you don't have to remind yourself to do it anymore, or if it starts to feel weird if you don't do it.
That's something that this is somewhat a plug for what we do with our trade business owners. When it comes to business planning, a lot of people go, I need to plan better. I should have a business plan or follow some sort of a action plan. And invariably, what we see with our newer clients, because they haven't, learned how to do it differently, is they have these big chunky things. So it's like, okay, in the next 90 days, I need to fix my marketing, which is a massive task for a lot of business owners, and they're already busy and stressed and overwhelmed. And so something that we do with our clients is take them through a process of breaking down their bigger intention into ridiculous tiny steps. Like that's just, they look at it and go, but this is stupid. Like that is such a small step. And just like you say, washing your hands, like it takes 60 seconds. It's easy. You don't even have to think about it. And so if you can break the achievement of your marketing changes down to, change the header on my Facebook page to this month's weather forecast, like that's ridiculous. How is that going to fix my marketing? It's a tiny little thing. And that process itself then starts to become habitual. And some of our clients are just finding themselves naturally breaking stuff down into ridiculously small steps.
Yeah.
Spin-off is that they're getting more done. So I love that idea of just make it small, make it simple. It doesn't help me because, I want to do everything all at once as an individual. Drive Coxie mad.
Those small, simple things are doing so much in our brain in the background. What they're doing is they're almost casting a vote for you being the person that invests in their marketing. It changes your sense of identity, but also achieving something gives us a hit of dopamine. And that creates this reward learning where your brain's like, well, that felt really good. We should totally do that again. And it reinforces the habit. It makes the habit stronger. So I know that it feels super tedious, but if you can remember that your brain is like frothing on you doing this, and it's actually really helping you long term, those small changes start to become a bit more significant.
This has got to be compulsory listening for all our clients from now on.
We're going to prescribe this.
Everything we say.
Gina, there's a question that I ask out of habit because we've been doing this podcast for so long that I can't not ask this question of our guests now. So there you go. It's a habitual question. If you had 1,000 trade business owners in a room, what is one piece of advice you'd love to leave them with?
Oh my goodness. That is the hardest question I've ever been asked. Can you please ask it again? I'm like, I got so overwhelmed with the question that I forgot it. Can you please ask it again?
I just built it up way too much.
Yes.
So 1,000 trade business owners sitting in a room.
Yeah.
What's one piece of advice you would like to leave them with?
Oh my gosh. I would say to them, you are not stuck with your brain. That no matter how old you are, no matter how long you've been doing something, our brain is so malleable and you can change your habits at any time that you want to. Simply, the more you do something, the more habitual it gets. And the less you do something, the less habitual it gets. And I would also really like someone to help me build a tiny home in my backyard. That's what I would say.
Just putting it out there.
I want it glass. I already got the plans.
Nice.
I love that, Gina.
I love that your pitch is, I need a tradie to help me build a tiny home. Here's my latest book on my program. But I love your answer. That's fantastic, because I think a lot of us, particularly those of us, who are a little more, anyway, they're older, right? Things have been laid down more. I think a lot of us think we're stuck with who we are. Yeah. And I think the way I think, and I do things the way I do, and I just can't change it. And I love that you've affirmed for me that I can change my brain. Coxie, look, I can change my brain.
And you are already, you're parenting differently. You're already changing things about not just what you do, but who you are. It's the belief systems that you hold around things like emotions and raising a small human being. And it's a beautiful thing to see that you can really develop and truly change what you think and believe.
Thank goodness for my wife. That's all I can say. Gina, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you about habits and retraining our brains and doing things differently today. Really appreciate your time. Do you have somewhere that people can find out more about you? Where should they go and do that?
Yeah, thank you. So my website is drginacleo.com, and on there I have a free habit masterclass you can sign up to. There's plenty of podcasts like this one. You can grab my book on there, and there's like tons of blogs that are for free. So just jump on there. There's heaps of free resources. And then my social media, I'm generally mostly on Instagram. It's also just Dr. Gina Cleo.
Love it, Gina. Thank you so much for your time today. It was a really interesting chat.
Awesome. So good to
Thanks,
chat with you
Gina.
both. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm off to make my night's coffee for the day. Thanks for listening.
True.